about bravery, a story about survival. This is the true story of the USS Indianapolis. She was a ship with an illustrious record in both war and peace. Commissioned in 1932, the Indianapolis was a favorite of President Franklin Roosevelt and used as his ship of state on tours and transatlantic crossings. World leaders walked her decks, and she symbolized the energy, strength, and military power of the United States Navy. This is her story. On a beautiful morning in December of 1941, a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor dragged the United States into World War II. It was clear from the start that much of this war would be fought at sea. Taking command of the Indianapolis and her crew was Captain Charles Butler McVeigh III. Born into a naval family, Captain McVeigh was a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee of the Combined Chiefs of Staff, and had been awarded the Silver Star earlier in the war for displaying courage under fire. To his crew, he was a proven leader, an authority of command, and an exceptional commander. The Indianapolis's first brush with misfortune came in the spring of 1945. Island-hopping assaults had brought American forces within miles of the Japanese homeland. Their next objective would be Okinawa, the perfect base for a final invasion. But the Japanese were running short on ships, men, and supplies. In desperation, they unveiled a new weapon, the kamikaze. On the morning of March 31st, the crew of the Indianapolis found themselves targeted by this ominous weapon. The Indy was hit, struck in the rear port side by a kamikaze, which inflicted heavy casualties and penetrated the ship's hull. It was the beginning of the end. As a consequence of the kamikaze attack, the Indianapolis was seriously damaged, but managed to limp back to San Francisco for repairs under her own power. Her crew had hoped that by the time she was ready to sail again, the fighting might be over. They weren't so lucky. In early July, Captain McVeigh received an unexpected order. Be ready to sail in 4 days. The Indianapolis was to prepare for a top-secret mission. So secretive was the mission, the Indy's crew would be kept in the dark. Leaves were canceled, repairs were hurried, as 2 mysterious pieces of cargo were loaded aboard the ship. The larger one was to be stowed on the quarterdeck and continually guarded. The smaller one would be guarded by 2 Army officers. Once the ship had left the San Francisco Bay, the crew was told by Captain McVeigh that the Navy had a mission for them, to see how fast a ship could travel. They made the crossing from San Francisco to Hawaii in only 74 and a half hours, setting a new record. But this was not their journey's end. Their ultimate destination was 2,000 miles away, a place called Tinian Island, located in the Marianas. When they arrived on July 26, they unloaded their secret cargo, the uranium hearts of 2 atomic bombs. 10 days later, a B-29 plane called the Enola Gay would drop one of these weapons on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, and the war would be almost over. Meanwhile, after the delivery of the secret cargo, the Indy and her crew were ordered to sail to the island of Guam and then on to Leyte in the Philippines. Traveling without an escort, her voyage would take her through dangerous waters infested with Japanese submarines and sharks. The crew relaxed, believing that the end of the war was in sight. What they didn't know was that on July 16th, the same day the Indianapolis left San Francisco, a Japanese attack submarine headed out from its own base on the prowl for enemy ships. The crew of the Indy had no idea they were being stalked by a killer. During wartime, naval procedures called for a zigzag course to deter submarine attacks, but only at the captain's discretion. Since there had been reliable reports of enemy activity along their route, Captain McVeigh decided that zigzagging was unnecessary. It would be a decision that would forever haunt him. At a few minutes past midnight, on July 30th, 1945, two Japanese torpedoes tore into the side of the USS Indianapolis, igniting an explosion. The ship broke apart in two. It took only 12 minutes for the ship to dip her bow, roll to starboard, and slip beneath the sea. Of almost 1,200 men on board, 300 would perish, trapped inside the Indianapolis. An estimated 900 sailors went into the water. Some were able to reach a raft or debris from the ship to cling to. Many wore life jackets that provided minimal protection. Just as many had neither raft nor life jacket and were forced to continually tread the oil-slicked water to survive. However, the worst was yet to come. On Tuesday, July 31st, the first day in the ocean, the men waited. They knew they were due into port and someone would come looking for them. Someone suggested they say the Lord's Prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Tomorrow came, and the next day, and the next day, yet no one ever looked. You see, the 5th Fleet's command wasn't even aware the Indianapolis had gone down. The explosion had knocked out her radio, so the Indy never had a chance to send out an SOS. At Leyte, port operations knew the ship's schedule, but when the Indy didn't show up on time, they assumed she had been rerouted. In fact, it would be days before anyone noted her failure to arrive. The ship had simply fallen through the cracks. Now her surviving crew members were adrift, spread out 20 miles in the ocean, facing dehydration, exhaustion, and they were not alone. Sharks were everywhere, hundreds of them, 5 to 6 feet long, packs of sharks. The water was clear, and so the men could see them, see their eyes, lazy, rolling eyes circling around and around. The men screamed, splashed, some stayed still. It didn't matter. The enemy now was unstoppable. A shark would hit, circle, and then take a man down. By Wednesday, August 1st, after nearly 3 days in the water, hundreds of men had died. The rest faced dehydration, exhaustion, lack of food and water, and exposure to the sun, each day getting worse than the day before. By their 4th day in the water, their situation was quickly becoming desperate. Hundreds had already perished. The dead littered the ocean, and the sharks continued to attack the living. And still, no one was looking for the Indy or her crew. This top-secret mission had truly been just that. And then on Thursday, August 2nd, the men heard a noise, the noise of an airplane. The men began to kick and scream and wave. It was Navy pilot Chuck Gwynn flying a venture bomber on routine anti-submarine patrol. He saw an oil slick on the water below, and thinking it was an enemy sub, he swooped down to attack. He was just 150 yards off the surface. Bomb bay doors opened when he saw the men in the water waving frantically. His radio report would trigger the rescue operation that the Indy survivors were waiting for. Gwynn continued to circle as long as he could, dropping his own survival supplies before he left. Within a few hours, a second plane arrived on the scene. Its pilot made a courageous landing on the choppy sea and provided a haven for the men until late that night when rescue ships began to arrive. As Navy ships raced to the site and began looking for the groups of sailors dotted around the ocean, many of the sailors simply waited, scared, in a state of shock, drifting in and out of consciousness. As 19-year-old sailor Lowell Dean Cox remembers that frightening night.
It got dark, and a strong big light from heaven, out of a cloud, came down, and I thought it was angels coming. But it was the rescue ship, shining its spotlight up into the sky to give all the sailors hope, and let them know that someone was looking for them. Sometime during the night, I remember strong arms were pulling me up into the ship. Just knowing I was safe was the best feeling
117 would survive the ordeal. 3 days later, on August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan, inflicting nearly 130,000 casualties and destroying more than 60% of the city. On August 9th, the second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, where casualties were estimated at over 66,000. On August 15th, 17 days after the USS Indianapolis had been lost to an enemy sub, United States President Harry S. Truman announced to the nation that Japan had surrendered. The Second World War was over. For the survivors of the Indy, tragedy has only served to strengthen the bonds of loyalty and friendship. They still gather at the National Memorial in Indianapolis to renew acquaintances and recall the good times and share the pain of their ordeal. The men, some in wheelchairs, others using canes, embrace one another and speak softly about their lives after the attack. As of July 2015, only 31 of the brave survivors of the USS Indianapolis are alive. It is now the children of the survivors who return to honor their loved ones' memories and to make sure that their story is forever etched in history. Far away from the mainland, please bring our sailor home. Fair winds and following seas, please put your safety first. Know that we are proud of you, so proud our hearts could burst. You wanted to honor our grandfather with the decision you made to join. 2 generations apart, both sailors at heart. Stationed far away, hundreds of miles out to sea, thank you for protecting us and making our lands free. Dedication, strength, integrity, honor, to name a few. Traits of an American soldier, words to define a new you. We love you, miss you, and are proud of you, our Navy man on loan. When your commitment is over, please bring our sailor home. This poem is dedicated to and in memory of the men and women who have served or are currently serving in the United States military, and to my grandfather, who served in the United States Navy from 1956 to 1960 and was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. And lastly, to my baby brother, who is currently serving in the United States Navy, undergoing a sustainment exercise in preparation for deployment in January 2016. This poem was written by me.